Coming up tonight on the Donlon Report, another real opportunity for America to lead on the virus front. It's there for the taking. Will the Biden administration pounce? Also, could the Oxford High School shooting have been much worse if not for the locks installed on classroom doors? We have the owner of the company who makes those locks and this.
If you're on this call, you are part of the unlucky group. Dude. That is being laid off. Your employment here is terminated, effective immediately.
Are you kidding me?
How's that for a Zoom call? One boss fires 900 people on that Zoom call, and we have the viral video, plus the TikToker who spoke to a lot of those workers. Her work has gone viral as well. Big show for you tonight. Glad to have you with us. Live from our Chicago studios, the Donlon Report starts right now. On this 80th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor, we are once again inspired to examine leadership in our country. That is the pulse of America tonight. When Japan attacked in 1941, America responded in a big way. There was clear leadership in Washington, among our military ranks, and most importantly, perhaps, in our towns and communities. When another enemy, COVID, struck in 2020, America responded as well. We listened to leadership. We developed a vaccine in record time, thanks to a coordinated effort from the government, business, and scientific communities. There are calls tonight for more American leadership on the global vaccine front, like we had before, like we even had in World War II, with everyone rallying around a common enemy. Top scientists are calling on the Biden administration to initiate a new Operation Warp Speed. The goal is to develop a vaccine that could fight any variant, including Omicron. The problem is we are divided on the vaccine when we should be claiming it as a global victory, an example of American ingenuity and determination. Would more folks on the right get the jab if the politicians they support, from President Trump on down, shouted from the rooftops that the vaccine was their victory? And did the left sow division and doubt when they questioned the vaccine's safety during the election? Perhaps you remember this from the campaign.
Should Americans take it, and would you take it?
If the public health professionals, if Dr. Fauci, if the doctors tell us that we should take it, I'll be the first in line to take it. Absolutely. But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
Perhaps Glenn Youngkin, the next governor of Virginia, helped define not only the GOP position on the vaccine, but a path for everyone to follow when he tweeted this after getting the booster shot. It's your decision, but I encourage every Virginian to join me. Together, we can help keep our communities safe. The vaccine is only one issue where we're searching for leadership, or at the very least, some common sense and common ground. We thought we saw leadership when 13 Republicans crossed the aisle to support the Biden infrastructure plan for the good of the country. They were met with death threats. Dare we say we saw leadership when Senator Joe Manchin, a Democrat, refused to shut down the government over the president's vaccine mandate, an issue where he aligns with Republicans. Quote, "I will not vote to shut down the government for purely political reasons. There's too much at stake for the American people." These examples seem few and far between and often get drowned out by the more vocal voices on the extreme ends of the political spectrum, which brings us back to Pearl Harbor and World War II veteran Bob Dole, who died over the weekend. His legacy could hopefully provide a blueprint for leadership. In fact, in his final op-ed, he wrote, "Meaningful change comes to the country when everyone puts aside their party label and works for the good of the country." His longtime speechwriter talked about that last night on this broadcast, as well as Dole's legacy of leadership.
It wasn't my way or the highway for him. It was, you had to work together with the Democrats. And in that last speech he gave on the Senate floor in '96, he said he realized that his biggest accomplishments were those that he did with Democrats.
In Dole's day, you knew the war heroes. These days, you know the social media stars. And that's where we begin tonight for the good of the country, with Democratic strategist Laura Fink and Washington Examiner editor-in-chief Hugo Gurdon. Great to have you both. Laura, let's start with you. From Bob Dole to today, what do you think has happened to our leaders?
Well, I think it's the times have changed, and so have the people. The power structure is very different. Consensus and bipartisanship is not rewarded in the same way politically in these very partisan, very divided times. The media infrastructure, the campaign financing infrastructure, all aligned with the more partisan you are, the more entrenched you can become, and potentially the most successful. So I think it's structural as well as personality, and it was something that we can look to Bob Dole as an example to where we might change and get better.
Hugo, let's, I guess, build on what Dole said, because there was a lot he wrote in that op-ed that caught our eye. One of them was teamwork is needed in Washington now more than ever. That seems to be the opposite of what we have. Do you think it is a social media problem? Is it a cable news problem? Is it the parties themselves?
I don't think it's primarily a social media problem. I think that though that, of course, makes it a great deal worse. One of the things that Bob Dole said is, and you quoted it, is when some meaningful change happens in this country, it's when people put aside their differences. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, that's completely untrue. It would be marvelous if the people would come together and decide things for the good of the country, but there's a great deal of meaningful change going on now. There's meaningful change in the curriculum at schools. There's meaningful change. I mean, it's very meaningful, for example, that people don't even know what a man is and a woman is these days. What we have at the moment on the left is a party that is uninterested in compromise. It is a revolutionary party, and reform, gradual change, and consensus is anathema to it. And when it comes to leadership, one of the important things is for the leadership of the Republican Party, the leadership of amongst conservatives, and indeed the leadership in sort of more moderate Democrats like Joe Manchin, is to realize that there is a big faction on the left which is uninterested in.
Wouldn't you say the same thing for the right, though, Hugo? Isn't that the same case on the right?
There are some. That's absolutely true. There are some crazies on both sides, and I think that, the Democrats are in charge now. The left has the upper hand, has the whip hand, and one of the unfortunate facts of political life right now is that people need to realize that there is the people who are currently, running the Democratic Party, that is, or pushing its agenda on the left, are not interested in compromise. Just think about the election. After the 2020 election, the Democrats had a smaller majority in the House, and they had no more seats in the Senate than the Republicans do. But they're legislating and acting as though they were given some huge mandate for radical change. That's why there's an enormous amount of, that's what makes things so difficult. They are uninterested in compromise, and that absolutely shows it.
Well, Laura, compromise to some anyway is an art. I guess to others, it's a weakness. Compromise just to compromise may not be the way to get there, but it is, or should be, at least an end to something that people agree is worth getting to.
Well, and I'm not going to respond to anything that I disagree with on the other side with my colleague, but I will take a page from Senator Bob Dole's book and talk about the issues that he deeply cared about, that he did compromise on: health care across his career, voting rights, passed the Voting Rights Act, renewed it in the 80s in a bipartisan way, was a proponent of ending hunger and working on food insecurity across the aisle, both as a senator and beyond, as a retired person and as a great leader, a great American leader, has worked on that up until his death. And so those are the types of things that we can focus on. And I truly, I'm a blue Democrat to the core, but I am not going to say that it's exclusively one party or the other, nor am I going to say that this will be easy, because again, structurally, there is divide in this country from the way that districts are drawn to the way campaigns are financed. And so it will take tremendous courage. But I look to something positive in that who is now President Biden, who's now our president. When Bob Dole was running in 1996, he said, if there was a Republican that I would support, it would be Senator Bob Dole. I think we have to look at our opposition and at people we disagree with in that way and say, if I had to pick a Democrat, who would it be? If I had to pick a Republican, who would it be? And those are the people that we can move forward and work together with, because the biggest issues very rarely get accomplished without some kind of compromise and support. We saw that, to your point, Joe, with the infrastructure bill, and hopefully we will see more moving forward, if not this year, then in the coming years.
Hugo, this is all great talk, but how do we get to this position where we're able to at least open our minds to something that might be worthwhile in the end if we're willing to be a little more flexible and look at what's best for the country as a whole and not necessarily party? Did we lose you, Hugo?
Getting to it, look, it would be wonderful if, Bob Dole was last in Congress 25 years ago.
Yep.
This was a completely different epoch. You know, the epoch that we are in now, and the whole premise of this segment of your show, the top of your show, is that we are in a different epoch now. And it's no point citing how people would get together for, an issue like hunger in the United States 25 years ago or 30 years ago. That isn't where we are. We are facing at the moment a radical left-wing takeover and change of this country. They even say that they're going to change the American way of life. Leadership now
Attacking the left probably isn't the exclusive answer, I would say.
No, it isn't the exclusive answer, but standing up to the left is one of the most important answers there is.
Well, one of the other interesting things was Senator Dole wasn't afraid to stand up within his own party and stand up to his own party. And since we're kind of honoring his legacy with this segment, I just wanted to point that out. So that's something, certainly, I think, Joe, that you pointed out in your opening segment, and something that we could see a little bit more of in both parties. But certainly, I would say in the Republican Party, we don't want to shut down the government. We don't want to use partisanship in fifth gear every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so I think that's something that's an accomplishable goal, even with the constraints.
Right. It is an exclusive, that's for sure. Hugo Gurdon, it's always good to have you, and Laura Fink as well, Rebel Communications founder. Hugo, of course, with the Washington Examiner. Thanks for your time.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Let's move on now to moving on. The top Republican in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, giving his party's Senate candidates some advice. Forget about 2020 and focus on what's ahead. Bernard, RNC spokesperson, joins us now. Good to have you again, Paris. So what do you think? Can you get past 2020?
Well, I'll tell you what the RNC is doing. The RNC is focused on the 2022 elections and making sure that we retire Nancy Pelosi and have the majority in the Senate, while at the same time fighting for the very things that so many millions of Americans hold very dear, which is the issue of election integrity. The RNC is fighting and intervened in cases in Georgia, cases in Florida, Texas, and Arizona. And we are currently engaged in litigation in 2 cities in Vermont where they're trying to allow for non-citizens to vote. And so we can look at what happened in 2020 and understand what the Democrats attempted to do and did do in terms of changing election laws in the cloak of darkness by using the guise of COVID-19.
You know that. The courts upheld all that.
But at the same time, what we're going to do is continue to fight and continue to put election integrity at the forefront of this process, because we have to have free and fair elections. Too many people that look like me literally bled and died for the right to vote. And now Democrats are trying to change the laws again and allow non-citizens to vote. It's not going to happen with the Republican
changes are happening in state legislatures that are Republican-led, Paris. The Democrats are fighting a lot of these changes.
When you talk about changes to election laws, we are fighting on election integrity. And a lot of times the Democrats are lying about what Republicans are doing, like they lied about what happened in Georgia. Look, if you're so concerned about election laws in Georgia.
What happened in Georgia, Paris, that they lied about?
They lied about the fact that they claimed that voters were not allowed to have water in the lines. That's not true.
That was removed, yeah.
That was a lie. They also lied and tried to, in Arizona, they tried to say that it was somehow unconstitutional and discriminatory by asking people to vote in their primary and not to have ballot harvesting. The RNC intervened in that. The Supreme Court upheld the fact that that is not discriminatory, and the Democrats could not find one example of anybody being discriminated against because of being asked to vote in their primary and not having ballot harvesting, because it was not true.
68% in your party, Paris, still think the election was stolen. How do we get past that?
We look forward by reminding those people that we have got to show up and to vote in 2022. Go to GOPvictory.com. We're encouraging people to register to vote and to vote, because the only way we take back this country, the only way that we ensure that the things that we care about is actually on the ballot and the candidates that we need that put America first are elected is if we show up and vote.
All right, Paris Denard, GOP spokesperson, it's always good to have you. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
President Biden threatens Vladimir Putin with economic sanctions. Will that stop Russia from invading Ukraine? Plus, as we mark 80 years since the attack on Pearl Harbor, we'll look at whether our Navy is ready for growing threats from China and others. Back after this. A push to de-escalate tensions between Russia and Ukraine. President Biden holding a high-stakes video call with Russia's Vladimir Putin, NewsNation's Kelly Meyer in Washington for us tonight. Kelly, President Biden was pretty firm, we understand, at least according to the White House, with Putin.
Yeah, Joe, that's right. That's the White House is saying that he was straightforward with Putin and direct in telling him what Russia could face should they invade Ukraine. The president giving Putin really two options here: de-escalate the current situation and return to diplomacy, or face severe sanctions. What happens next, the White House says, is up to Putin. But here's what the U.S. is threatening. The White House says they are prepared to provide more defensive material to the Ukrainians and send more U.S. troops to our NATO allies in the region. On sanctions, the White House wasn't specific on, they didn't expand on the specifics here, but they say they would be the harshest yet, more severe than when Russia invaded Crimea 7 years ago. And the U.S. could push Germany to stop a gas pipeline from Russia. They would also, the Nord Stream 2 would be another blow to Russia's economy. What the White House says, they believe Putin hasn't decided yet what he will do next, but they're hoping to stop him before he takes any further action. Here's what White House officials had to say today.
I will look you in the eye and tell you, as President Biden looked President Putin in the eye and told him today, that things we did not do in 2014, we are prepared to do now. Now, in terms of the specifics, we would prefer to communicate that directly to the Russians, to not negotiate in public.
And Joe, to underscore the urgency of the situation, the president spoke with NATO allies today, from Italy to the UK to France to Germany, breaking down what happened on this call with Putin. And he's also speaking with members of Congress from both the House and the Senate tonight on that call. Joe?
Kelly Meyer, live in D.C. Thank you very much. Joining us now with more on this is John Jordan, former naval intelligence officer and someone with extensive knowledge of Russia. All right, John, let's start with what we heard there from the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. It appeared to him anyway that Putin hadn't made a decision about whether to invade Ukraine. Do you believe that?
Yes, I believe that Putin is trying to test the West, trying to see how far he can push us, how far he can intimidate the Europeans, because after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, America's adversaries wanted to retest the envelope, retest the contours of America's commitments. And that's what you buy when you walk away from a commitment like we did in Afghanistan, is this type of test. So he wants to see how far we'll go, how tough we'll be. Will the Europeans back us up on this? And will he be able to extract some sort of concession? Now, in this case, it looks like Putin wants a written guarantee that Ukraine will not be allowed to enter NATO, and guarantees from the West that certain classes of weapons would not be introduced to Ukrainian soil, either as part of the Ukrainian military or part of any Western mission to Ukraine.
I get the impression, even just looking at this video of Vladimir Putin, that somehow sanctions don't really, they don't scare him, I don't think, or they wouldn't deter him anyway. Do you agree?
Well, he certainly wouldn't show it. He's got one heck of a poker face as a chekist, which is the Russian term for former KGB. Russia is concerned about sanctions to some degree. There are two types of sanctions that would really, really hurt Russia economically. One is to be banned from the SWIFT system, which is the international banking posting system based in Belgium, which allows for interbank transfers. To be kicked out of that would be devastating. It certainly was catastrophic for the Iranians. The second is for secondary sanctions, which means to sanction those companies that work in the secondary markets for Russian government debt. That would really hurt the ruble and really hurt Russia economically. So those would impact the Russian economy, but we could impose sanctions on certain, the business interests of certain oligarchs that are close to Putin, and that might be politically painful. Now the question is, will the Europeans go along with it? I'm not so sure that they will, but Putin wants to find out.
All right, John, we want to get you on another issue today. Of course, the 80th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. We all remember what happened after that, but we also remember how off guard we were all caught at the time. Where do you think our Navy stands right now, in your opinion? Are we ready?
Well, certainly we're ready for a conflict of 20 years ago. The problem with the Navy, more than any other service, is the lead time to build up the capital assets to fight these wars. So you have to think about the type of war you're going to fight 20 years ahead of time. Yes, certainly we're the most potent Navy on Earth, but are there ways around it? You bet. Hypersonic technology poses a threat to us, to our largest capital ships, aircraft carriers, and we probably don't have enough submarines at present.
Right. Do you imagine, I was thinking about this today, John, do you envision a war the likes of which we've only really seen in the history books with aircraft carriers and battleships, and this is something that's fought at sea like this?
Well, aircraft carriers always will have a role. Basically, they're mobile airfields, and as long as airplanes are important, aircraft carriers will be important. The war of tomorrow is really one of sea denial and being able to sever sea lanes and trade routes and isolate an adversary, in this case, potentially China, or to deny China forced amphibious access to Taiwan. And that requires, at least in the face of a peer-to-peer air threat like China, that would submarines would probably be the best way to do that. And we're probably a little short in that department.
Fascinating insight. John Jordan, it's great to have you as always. Thank you.
My pleasure.
A lot of parents in Oxford, Michigan credit this device, a floor-mounted door lock, for saving lives during the school shooting. We have the owner of that company who makes that lock next. We also have more information about the parents of the accused shooter. And why is the school denying the request for an investigation into the warning signs from that day? Back with more after this. Funeral was held today in Oxford, Michigan for 16-year-old Tate Meyer. Meyer was one of 4 students killed at Oxford High School last week when police say 15-year-old Ethan Crumbley opened fire in the school using a gun prosecutors say was given to him by his parents. Tate played football, was on the honor roll. His team says he was beloved by all and had a bright future. As the community works to heal from the tragic loss of those students following last week's shooting, some parents are now giving thanks to one company for protecting their kids' lives. The company is called NightLock. It's essentially a barricade that prevents an intruder from breaking in during an emergency situation. Roughly 700 devices have been installed across the Oxford School District. And joining me now for more on this is NightLock co-founder Joe Taylor. Joe, it's great to have you. What did it mean to you to hear these parents at this school crediting your product with saving lives?
Well, it's a little overwhelming. You know, we can take part of the credit. We were just one piece of the puzzle. They had a lot of other protocols and trainings that helped a lot as well. Our devices were activated, and it's the first that we've heard that our products have been put into action in an actual active shooter event.
Yeah, so we're looking at this video here. We can kind of get an idea, Joe, of how this works. So the lock is kept right next to the door so that anyone can quickly put it on. And what happens, I guess people would ask if they need to get into it from the other side, say whether that's a teacher who's, you know, trying to get them to safety or maybe police trying to get in. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, we've got a special tool that we give to the schools, and they give the first responders access to them, and they can get in. Most of the schools tell us that their policy is when you go into lockdown, don't come out, you know, for anything. You know, as in Oxford, you know, you hear about the guy on the other side of the door trying to possibly trick them into opening the door as well. Most of the schools will just say, you're in there, stay there, and the police will, first responders will let you out.
So you were focused more on the residential market, Joe. When did you see this change and this school application? Because it sounds to me like Oxford was one of the earlier, I guess, users of this, but 700 devices is pretty widespread. Are you getting calls from other districts now, a lot of them?
Oh, yes, the phone's ringing off the hook. After the Parkland shooting in Florida, that was a really busy year. And it's, I think, you know, a lot of it comes down to budget and just the timing. You know, it takes a lot of work to, you know, get things done, I suppose. And I think most schools would like to have as much protection possibilities as possible, you know, from cameras to mass communication systems. There's so much that goes into this stuff.
Well, it's a simple device, and we're glad that it's working. And it sounds like it worked. You're hearing from these parents who are thanking you for what it did for them in that school. NightLock co-founder Joe Taylor, thanks for the time. We appreciate it.
Hey, thank you very much.
While NightLock may have helped save students' lives, many have raised the question of whether more lives could have been saved. Could the school have possibly done more to prevent this shooting altogether? Well, now Michigan's Attorney General Dana Nessel says the school district has rejected her offer to review the shooting. And joining us now for more on that, NewsNation's Brian Etten. Brian, what is she saying, the AG, about this investigation and why the school district passed?
Well, she doesn't know exactly why, but she got word from the school district early this morning, basically, thanks, but no thanks. We don't want you to do an independent investigation into what happened here. What we know from the school district is that they plan to hire their own private security company to come into Oxford and tell them what went right and what went wrong. The Attorney General today said at this point she is not going to move forward and do a full investigation on her own, but she did say she is still going to look into what happened. Listen to what she told us earlier.
We're not going to just do nothing, right? We asked for their open cooperation, and at this point, they're not ready for that yet. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to, you know, when I say launch our own investigation, what I mean is review all of these materials, have all of these conversations.
And what's interesting talking to people here, Joe, is they are concerned that this private security company that the district will pay and hire themselves might be looking out for the district. You know, there are all these civil lawsuits that could be looming. So you have people in the community worried. Is the district worried about the lawsuits? And is that why they're hiring the security company? Or do they actually want to find out what happened here?
It sounds like the AG is going to go ahead either way, Brian. That was going to be my question. I didn't realize you could say no to an AG investigation, but it sounds like that will go on either way. But let me ask you one other thing that we're hearing about a call that was made to Child Protective Services about the Crumleys. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this is new and interesting. Reports that there was a neighbor of the Crumleys 6 or 7 years ago who says that the Crumleys would leave their home, go bar hopping and get drunk, and leave their son Ethan, who was 8 or 9 years old at the time, home all alone. And there was not even a phone in the house. And this neighbor says that Ethan, at just 8 or 9 years old, would have to leave and come and knock on the neighbor's door to use the phone while the parents, Jennifer and James, were out bar hopping. Apparently, this was reported to Child Protective Services. Unclear how the investigation panned out.
NewsNation's Brian Etten, thank you for the update live tonight for us in Oxford. Joining me now to help dive into some of the mental health questions relating to this story is clinical psychologist Dr. Adolf Brown. Doc Brown is what he goes by, and he joins us now. You've seen, Doc, a lot of this play out now. What do you think are some of the factors that stand out to you in this particular case, especially involving these parents?
Well, I think one of the issues that we have to recognize is that parents, the role of parenting is to guard and to guide. And these parents, it's as if they did not do that. They didn't guard and guide properly or appropriately. And I think when other parents are looking at this situation, there's something that we all have to recognize, Joe, is that as parents, we really can't tether ourselves to the choices our children make. They're going to make these choices outside of us. What we can do is do our best to influence them and teach them before the choice is made about the consequences. Every decision has a future. Every child needs to know that. Every decision has a future, and that starts at home.
Yeah. So I know you've had a lot of experience with this, Doc, and we've had enough experience with school shootings to know as well. But how do students go back, and how do parents feel safe ultimately sending their kids back knowing what happened there?
Well, parents are the chief tone setters, Joe. Parents set the tone. When parents are anxious and concerned and really fearful, the children, it's contagious. Parents need to know things that the schools are doing to protect them. From the lock that we just demonstrated on the show, from their schools that I go to where they have marshals. And basically what those are, they're teachers that are armed in case of emergencies. Teachers, administrators, no one knows, but these people have been duly trained to respond to active shooter threats. So schools are really proactive in this. The issue is that parents we have to do our duties at home. And if parents don't recognize that, when the roles shift, think about when children were home learning virtually and how difficult that was for parents. So, we have to do our respective roles to make this work.
Clinical psychologist, Dr. Adolf Brown. Doc Brown, it's great to have you. Thanks for the time.
Thank you for having me.
A company-wide Zoom call goes viral. Listen to this.
If you're on this call, you are part of the unlucky group that is being laid off. Your employment here is terminated, effective immediately.
Are you kidding me?
You heard that right. A CEO fires 900 people over Zoom. We have someone who helped that video go viral and spoke with some of the employees who got the boot. Ahead.
If you're on this call, you are part of the unlucky group that is being laid off. Your employment here is terminated, effective immediately.
Are you kidding me?
That was the CEO of mortgage company Better.com, Vishal Garg, holding a Zoom call with 900 employees, letting them know they were all losing their jobs. Joining me now for more on this, a TikToker who's been hot on this story and talked with a number of those employees who were let go, Kiera Bowie. Kiera, so explain to me what happened here. You just thought you'd post this and it kind of took off from there.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy. So I initially found this video on an anonymous professional network called Blind. So initially the video was on YouTube, hosted by someone anonymous, but the video did not have many views. And so I was like, how do I give this more attention and exposure? Because honestly, there was just like so many things wrong with that video. Like my initial reaction was that, why did he keep talking about himself? Like, for the first 1 or 2 minutes or so, he keeps saying I and me, like, I do not want to do this. The last time I did this, I cry, as if, the news is about him, but it's not. It's about the people that got laid off. And it seems like he didn't really care about his employees. And so that's why I decided to share on TikTok, and it just like took off from there.
Yeah, 4 million views, I guess, later. A lot of the workers as well, Kiera, I guess, contacted you after you started posting these things. What did they tell you?
Yeah, they have told me many things. For example, one person said that they were on paid time off and they didn't even know that the meeting was happening until they got a bunch of texts from their coworkers to log into the Zoom meeting. They also said that apparently the layoff seems really random with every department impacted. So it impacted like top sales performers, senior management, the entire diversity, equity, and inclusion team, and countless other people. Other people also told me they were never invited to the meeting. So they took a nap, and once they woke up, they were signed out of everything. And so it was crazy.
Was there any indication from these people who were fired that this was coming? Because I got the impression from the CEO, at least from some of what you posted, that this company is doing very well.
Yeah, so apparently the company just received like $750 million injection from SoftBank, and they're about to go IPO. So I feel like they're doing really well. And I checked the CEO LinkedIn, and it said that the company grew 300% this year. So it's not like they're suffering.
All right, TikToker Kiera Bowie, thanks for the insight. We appreciate it, and good luck to you.
Thank you.
Joining me now for more on this, Tracy Burns, our friend with UBS Financial Services. Tracy, I don't know. I thought there was a worker shortage. What happened here?
I mean, this is like a whole new level of narcissism, right? If this guy actually didn't think this wasn't going to go viral, I mean, and look, we all know you vote with your wallet. There's a lot of things people could do to make a point about this, that this should not happen in this day and age, right, Joe? With sexual harassment suits, Chris Cuomo just got fired. I mean, there's so much going on in the world that's wrong. This gentleman should have known what he was doing. And I'll tell you what, it's an awful, awful thing with the holidays right around the corner. But people should take advantage of this. And as you and I have talked about in the past, do what you were meant to do. Maybe this is an opportunity and they should take it and go for it. And maybe in a small way, he was doing them a big favor, because who wants to work for someone like that?
How do you normally, I guess, let 900 employees know that they're being let go? Is there a better way to do this?
No, look, you're not wrong there, right? I don't know. I don't have that answer. I've never been a CEO, and especially in this day and age when we're not in the office. But I feel like there has to be a better way, especially, as your previous guest just said, some of them missed a meeting. They slept right through it. Right. So at least maybe take the time. What could it take you, a day and a half, to personally tell people and apologize and explain the rationale behind it? Because you got none of that with this Zoom call.
Not to mention the fact that I've seen anywhere from between 10% and 15% of the workforce. That's a lot of people.
It's a ton of people. And again, as she said, they are in growth mode. He did not sound like a great person to work for, though. And so I think eventually people would have probably called it quits. Many did. A bunch of his top-level CEO people left right after this happened because they didn't agree that it was the right way to do this. So it feels like it was not a great work culture to begin with.
Right. Well, and I was going to ask, what do you think this does to the company's reputation?
Again, I think people, nowadays, Joe, especially post-COVID, people are truly, I see the way they invest with their hearts and their morals. You can move your dollars to where you want it to go. And if you need a mortgage, there are other options out there for you, if indeed you disagreed with the way this went down. I don't think this is going to be good for the company going forward.
Right. The last time we talked, what do we call it? The Santa Claus market at the end of the year? What is it called?
Santa Claus rally.
The rally, that's right. So we're seeing that, I guess, right? Yep. Are we not? Because we've got the markets are at record highs. And I guess what? The NASDAQ today was the best day since March.
It happens, right? It's kind of crazy how it happens every year, but it's also part of the cycle. A lot of people take profits. A lot of people take money out of the market, and hedge funds in particular. They close their books in November and they say, you know what, we did good. Why risk the end of the month? So you do see some selling. You see tax loss selling. Much of that might be done by now. So we're slowly getting ourselves back to normal. You and I have talked about this. The economy seems to be in pretty good shape. As you mentioned, there are tons of open jobs out there. Companies' balance sheets are still pretty strong. Earnings for fourth quarter are probably going to be pretty good. So we just had a little, overselling, overbuying. They moved it around a little bit too much. Omicron scared a bunch of people. I think we're selling ourselves out, and I think Santa will make it after all.
All right. Well, the other good news we got, Tracy, is that, the last time we talked about natural gas prices, they were high, and we were worried about that going into the winter. But now we're hearing that the futures are down 40% since October. So this might be more good news. People will be paying less to heat their homes this winter.
Right, correct. And I think a little of that has to do with the fact that people got scared by this new COVID variant, and travel may or may not be changed because of it. But that said, everything settles out in due time, right? I tell my kids, you always have to take a breath. No knee-jerk reactions. Everything settles itself out. And I think that's what's happening here.
All right. It's always great to have you, Tracy Burns, our friend from UBS Financial. Take care.
You too, Joe.
On Balance with Leland Vittert starts at the top of the hour, and he joins us now with a preview. What do you have?
Hey, good seeing you. And it's going to sound like a broken record, but new record numbers of people crossing the border illegally, up 163% from this time last year. So we're going to talk about that, how the Remain in Mexico policy that President Biden just put in is not sitting well at all with Democrats. You're looking at video of one of the latest caravans now heading up north through Mexico. We're going to talk to a reporter who's been with that caravan and talking to them about what President Biden's policies mean, and then also to a reporter on Capitol Hill about the infighting in the Democratic Party about it.
Why are they against it, Democrats?
Why are Democrats against remain in Mexico? Right. Because it forces people who come across and claim asylum to go back to Mexico to wait for their asylum claims to be adjudicated. Starting on January 20th, just a couple of hours after President Biden was inaugurated, he eliminated remain in Mexico. That meant if you came here with a underage child and claimed asylum, you said you were from El Salvador and you were scared of a gang, you got let into the United States immediately. And there were hundreds of thousands of people who took advantage of that from then until now. Thus, it's changing.
All right, we'll see what happens with, I guess, because right now it's only in El Paso and San Diego, I guess, to start.
Yeah, Rio Grande Valley and others aren't doing it yet.
All right, we'll see at the top of the hour. Leland Vittert, On Balance, our American Snapshot tonight, remembering Pearl Harbor, then and now.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
That, of course, is how Americans have come to remember the attack on Pearl Harbor, thanks to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Today marks 80 years since the attack on Pearl Harbor, the day Japan bombarded the U.S. Navy base in Hawaii, destroying more than half of the aircraft fleet and damaging all 8 battleships. Some 2,400 service members and civilians were killed, more than 1,100 injured. One day later, of course, the U.S. declared war on Japan and officially entered World War II. Today, Specialist Second Class Charles Saunders was laid to rest in his hometown of Winnie, Texas. The sailor was 18 years old when he died aboard the USS Oklahoma, along with more than 400 others. Saunders was given a processional and a graveside service complete with military honors. He was buried next to his parents. Saunders wasn't identified until recently through a 6-year military project to match human remains from the ship to the names of 355 sailors and Marines. Meantime, in Washington, President Biden and the First Lady Jill honored those lost in Pearl Harbor with a visit to the World War II Memorial. The First Lady laid a bouquet in honor of her father, Donald Jacobs, who served as a U.S. Navy signalman in World War II. The president touched a wreath and then saluted. The wreath contained a wild sunflower, that's the state flower of Kansas, in honor of former Senator Bob Dole, a World War II veteran who died this weekend. Also today, survivors, family members, and military leaders, current service members as well, all took part in the 80th Pearl Harbor Day Remembrance Ceremony in Hawaii. The theme this year, Valor, Sacrifice, and Peace. That's our snapshot on this December 7th. The remaining survivors of that attack representing the resilience and resolve of a generation that endured incredible sacrifices. On Balance next. Thank you for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.